Christian, in and out of the church, and until high school, I basically had a wake-up call. Someone I knew, a vegan, and she showed me Earthlings. I'm not sure if any of you have seen it. But from there, I went vegan and started to really just dive into social justice issues. I grew up very, very privileged and, upper middle class family, and my parents didn't tell me about any of this stuff, poverty and racism and patriarchy and hierarchy. Didn't really know anything, and so I was sort of like baptized by fire into it through my own sort of ventures and people close to me kind of talking with me about it, non-Christian friends, of course. And at this point, I was still going to church. I was working in a charismatic church at the time, and found that the church wasn't talking about any of these things. And not only that, but they were holding up some of these oppressive structures that I was learning about, that I was a woman, that I couldn't really speak up in church, that I couldn't become a pastor. Or I talked about, veganism. I'd be like, hey, Taylor, what'd you do this weekend? Well, I went to this demo at this vivisector's house and was waking him up at 7 in the morning with bullhorns. What did you do? And like I sort of got the wide-eyed and sort of learned to remain silent about those things through sort of being outcasted from the Christian community. And then really got into animal activism because I became outcasted in the church in some degrees, and then going into organizing spaces and organizing with folks who had been deeply harmed and traumatized by the church, working with queer folks and people who have been demonized and seen as like otherly by Christians for many, many years. And so it's very polarizing as like Christian anarchists to be in these two worlds, not really fitting into either. And sort of in Christianity being labeled as the liberal Christian, or sort of like fallen from faith. But I still remained hopeful and went to, for whatever reason, a very conservative church or school, and studied philosophy and theology, and met a Christian anarchist who became my philosophy advisor, which was amazing, and started to see that Christianity has a long history of anarchism and anti-capitalist views. And currently there are groups, collectives like Jesus Radicals that are doing this work and providing alternative spaces for Christians who want to exit the type of North American evangelicalism that they grew up in. And really with that, got really involved in animal activism, and not only that, but as a queer person, I came out as queer on campus, and we started the Biola Queer Underground, which was an underground group of queer and trans students that did small actions to try to create awareness for policies that basically made it unacceptable and almost like illegal. You'd get kicked off campus just existing as a queer person and acting on those impulses. And doing some of that and finding folks that were not quite anarchists, but were doing the kind of things that I found myself starting to believe in. And it fit with my version of the gospel, that I was this like liberative sort of view that Jesus was standing with the poor, and in this upside down kingdom that Jesus really stood with the marginalized. But after graduating school, I still didn't find that space. I sort of did, but not really, and so I got really involved in the nonprofit sectors. I started for many years doing undercover investigations in factory farms with a group called Compassion Over Killing, until I got into a little legal trouble, stopped that, and started to rethink, one, just nonprofits in general, and then what I could do with our collective, which now we're living together, what our strength is in anarchism and in these movements. And I really think that creating alternative spaces for Christians to come in and realize that not all Christianity and the Gospels don't really look like North American evangelicalism. So we as a collective host a fairly good amount of events at our house, like prison letter writings, and are involved in Antifa's work and other sort of anarchist stuff, Black Lives Matter things. And that's really my hope for our community, is that we can draw the church in and show them that church is not really a building, but church should be in the streets with the marginalized, and this is what we predominantly see in the gospel narrative. So that's kind of our hope, and we continue to do that. One of our collective members is not here. Their name's Ezra. They say hello. I wish they could be here. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay, a little about me. I won't go too much, but I grew up basically like what I call an ultra mega Christian, because I was a pastor's kid, which means 3 times a week I was at church at least. I attended a private Christian school where both my parents also taught, so my whole world was just encompassed in that, all the way up till high school. And during that time I became very interested, because I was so surrounded by it, interested in the Bible, in the ministry, and in Christian evangelism, which that actually, those interests led me into feminism and feminist theology, because I was like, I'm a girl, but I want to be a pastor, like Taylor was saying, and I was like, oh, I can't do that, you know. Interestingly, the denomination that I grew up in, they did affirm women in ministry, but on paper they did, but you know how it goes in this world. But so I became interested in feminist theology, and that kind of, I think, set the track for me to be always open and always critiquing into these things that in the evangelical Christian world you shouldn't critique, you know, you just believe and you go, like doubt is a bad thing, you know, and so I was always trying to embrace those things. I attended a conservative Christian university in Oklahoma where I studied Christian theology and ministry. And I worked at an even more conservative Christian summer camp for 3 years, where I was considered too radical because I was feminist and because I had short hair, and that freaked everybody out. And then I watched Earthlings as well, and that's how I became vegan, and immediately it kind of just like turned, I know, if you watch Earthlings, it's just, there you go. But anyway, it kind of like oriented me more towards radical politics. That's kind of what I think is like the road I started to take. Because I learned through going vegan, I learned more and more about my passive participation in systemic violence with the genocide of billions of animals, as well as in the different marginalization of people and oppression of people of color and by the state. In my school, may I remind you, a very conservative Christian school, I started a feminist club that I called the Gender Equality Club, where we basically I had to define a lot of words to people. What does feminism mean? It's really not that scary. You know, like I created a space where we can learn and where we can discuss feminism and discuss the gender hierarchies that we experienced on campus and in the churches. We had problems on campus with expectations of modesty and slut shaming and these complementarianist like views where women have these roles, this biblical womanhood. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of that. There's actually a book about by Rachel Held Evans where she tried to live a whole year of biblical womanhood, where she went and read like the Old Testament, and she did things like she had to live in a tent outside during her period, and she had to cover her head all the time. She had to do everything her husband said. And it's really interesting. So this biblical womanhood. And so we talked about that, and I definitely pushed against that, and I agree that this biblical womanhood that people still talk about today is used to oppress and to minimize women and their participation in society. In the church, often women are silenced, and they're told that their God-given role is to live under the leadership and sovereignty of their fathers and then later their husbands. And obviously there's no room for anything outside of these gender roles, this dualistic hierarchy thing that Christian tradition has created. I also co-taught a class on Christianity and animal rights at the university. We called it God's Peaceable Kingdom. We talked about, okay, what did God mean when, if we read like Genesis, the Genesis narrative, it seems like there's this idea that the authors that wrote it, like there's something that God had, that they hoped that God had this intention for creation. And so we discussed things like eco-theology and animals in the Bible and how they were treated and what it was like, and kind of determined that we're all part of this cosmos, the universe, and that we all matter. Everybody matters. That's everything. And I think that's that has a lot. That is really in tune with what my Christianity is. So then I moved to Denver for the same reasons that everyone else gave. And I'm currently going to Iowa School of Theology with Kyle. My goal in the long term is to work with those who've experienced spiritual trauma from oppressive church settings. So I'm studying the oppressive role that Christianity has in global capitalism, in Euro-American colonialism, how colonialism and Christianity work together. They both built each other up, and that's why they're both empire. And is it even possible that we can emerge from that? Can Christianity be redeemed? Those would be questions that I've always asked and that I wondered. So I'm studying these things so that I can someday counsel those who are emerging from these harsh fundamentalist Christian traditions and show that maybe there are other ways to be Christian and to create an alternative. And that's something also with one of my hopes for our community is that we can be a place of alternatives, We can be a place of solace and of freedom and hope for those who have been hurt by the church and by oppressive structures. And I hope that we can create this place of radical acceptance and gentleness and love through our solidarity, through works of activism, and through just existing. So yeah, I think that's all I have. I think that my religious beliefs are an integral part of my politics. I believe that Jesus, if we read about him, he was in opposition to the power structures of his day, and I am too. Do you have any responses?
Great, really, really fascinating to hear your stories. Thank you very much for sharing them with us. That was absolutely fascinating. I share a lot of your interests. I'm a faculty now at a university, criminal justice and penal abolitionist, and do stuff around that. But actually, my PhD was in justice studies, but my beginning was BA in religious studies, and actually got a master's from Harvard Divinity School. So I have a lot of curiosities, I have a lot of interests like you do. So I wanted to ask, so from a very friendly perspective, I asked this question. That's why I set up my intro the way I did. I want to ask you, I guess it's for all three of you, when you declare yourselves as Christians, is this because there's a powerful literature, like the liberation theology that I also studied and really loved, and admiring the idea or historical personhood of somebody like Jesus of Nazareth in terms of the ideas that were propagated? Or is it more than that? Is there also, this is really the heart of my question, is there also a practice? Do you have some kind of belief, maybe obviously for you three it will not be a white bearded man in the sky, but some kind of God power or something like that? I'm curious to hear if it's Christianity that's beyond the powerful things that have come in the name of Christianity or the model of a person, or if it's also what more traditionally gets called a religion.
Sure. So I'm currently studying a theoretical framework, or theological framework called process theology. It's very heady, which I hate, very impractical in some ways. There's not a lot of practical work done around it. But for me, process theology, understanding God in light of process, rather essentially, there's a guy named Alfred North Whitehead who invented process philosophy, moving away from viewing the world as material substance and viewing the world as events, where nothing is ever the same in each moment. And process theology kind of takes that into the theological realm and says, well, maybe God isn't the same in each moment. And it kind of gets away and deconstructs the Greek philosophical framework that classical theology is built around. And so for me, that opens up a whole new realm of kind of the spiritual side of things for me. Prayer becomes something that isn't necessarily asking this bearded white guy in the sky, to intervene in reality, but more how can I find myself to become more in tune with my surroundings. So to me, there is a spiritual practice in that, and contemplating and working together and trying to figure out what it is that love or what God is calling me to do in each moment. So there's definitely an awareness, or like I said, a presence that I'm trying to become more present in each moment in that. And so to most Christians, it doesn't sound like Christianity at all, but from my understanding of the biblical text and in light of process theology and things like that, it really opens up my understanding to these ideas, talking about the Spirit of God, prayer, those types of things. They become way less supernatural and something that is very informative and intuitive in many ways. I'm sorry if that didn't directly answer your question, but
Sure, it answers. Do the others going to say anything about that?
I also have really enjoyed studying process theology. I just think because I don't think the upbringing that I have, like creationism and things like that, like I'm like, like doesn't work. And that's why process theology kind of, the idea is that God is with us in every moment and co-creating everything that we do with us and drawing us towards what is best for the world, what is best for us in every moment. And I think that maybe that doesn't look anything like the conscious God that makes choices and that is all powerful, that can do anything but chooses not to in every moment that I grew up with. And instead, this entity thing, whatever it is that I call God, is just ultimately love. And I still feel comfortable calling it God. And I still feel like the teachings of Jesus, and I think there's a lot, like in Kyle talked about the book of Acts, the first Christian community that ever existed. I think there's still something to that, and there's still something to Jesus that keeps me around. And I don't know what it is sometimes, but I'm sticking it out. So. A couple.
I was just thinking that my own spiritual awakening, by the way, came Chinese from Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. So, but what I think I came to believe was that in all religious traditions, and for that matter in people who call themselves secular humanists, that there is a division between the side of ourselves that believes in giving consequences or in punishment, and that believes in the spirit of love in the sense of what brings us together as peers, as equals, in friendship. And that's the position the Dalai Lama takes too. So if that's the case, it becomes then to be a matter of understanding that the language that we use, the words that we use may differ, but to understand that we're all, in many ways, many of us talking about the same thing regardless, across religious traditions. And that element, that spiritual element is important, whether or not you attribute it to God.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're all trying to figure it out. Nobody knows what we're doing. We're just kidding. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious how you folks in your activism or within your collective or on a personal level negotiate a lot of the inherently hierarchical and oppressive structures that Scripture necessitates and advocates for, like heteronormative nuclear family structures, like governments as ordained by God, things like that. Can you speak to that at all?
I think approaching the Bible is something that I had to like kind of relearn, because growing up it was like, this is it, this is everything you'll ever need to know, like you can just open it and God will tell you something, and that it's like sacred, the Holy Bible. And I still think, like I have a professor, she says like it is like a living word, like there's something, it's a cool, really cool ancient document. If you think of it that way, and that it's these people, the Hebrews, they were trying to figure out everything too, you know? They were trying to understand, like, what is happening to them when they get shot into exile over and over again, like, what is God, our God is doing something, we have a God, we're special, you know, those kinds of concepts, and like, but it's still, this document is like a living word that you can find new truths and new interesting things, even if it's just like, oh, that's a kind of cool, that word means this and whatever, that kind of thing. But I think so it depends on your approach. Like, I no longer believe that the Bible is inerrant, which is like the sola scriptura thing, like the Bible is all that you need. And in regards to all of the hierarchical things, like how things like women have to cover their heads, they can't talk in church, they can't be in leadership, they have to be subject to their husbands and that kind of thing. I think it's really reflective of the time and the patriarchal like place that they were writing from. And I think sometimes, like often, I want to just like throw it out and be like, don't worry about it, you know. But we do have to face it and wonder and think, why did they say these things? Why did Paul say whatever he said? And why did they think that God was going around punching people and like throwing fire down or whatever, like sending armies and stuff?
Well, I think we're not interested as a community in apologetics, so we're not interested in like trying to redeem those things. I think we're pretty much all in agreement that Paul was pretty misogynistic and xenophobic, and that when we read the text, we need to be aware of those things and be aware of the prejudices that the people who are writing these texts brought to the table. And I think that's kind of our starting point, is entering into that conversation by not trying to defend it, but by taking seriously those critiques and the critiques that we bring to it as well, and saying, well, okay, like, Paul's pretty in support of slavery here. That's not okay. I don't agree with that. But what is Paul trying to say? And what is Paul trying to get at? Even though he's limited by these oppressive structures that kind of shape and form the way he's speaking. And so I think in many ways, the way I approach it is I see this vision that they're portraying, but I also see the downfalls and how they're not living these things out that they're trying to communicate. And I think in some ways that translates to how we live, is trying to be aware of the same ways that we fall short in that. And we can talk about dismantling hierarchy, we can go out and do protests and stuff like that, but that's all for naught if we're not also transforming the way we interact on a daily basis. So if we're doing an animal rights protest or something like that, if we're not also trying to figure out how in our daily lives we're, trying to combat that through our language, no longer calling animals it, but them, those types of things, I think that really helps us kind of navigate the text in that way. I don't know if that's what you're...
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking.
We are running out of time. You're over. Just to respect our time schedule. But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys can talk to us whenever. We try to put a Facebook page up, and it's still kind of there. Just the Jubilees.
Thank you.
Thank you.